It was outside the scope of the bill. Mr Speaker, I commend this bill to the House.
Well done. Mr Speaker.
Honourable Ruth Dyson.
It was a very gallant effort to drag that out a little bit. Member who's just resumed his seat. Can I, Mr Speaker, begin, as the Honourable Dr Nick Smith did in his contribution, just acknowledge and comment on the vision of the original supporters of Deans Bush and the people who ensured that this piece of Canterbury was protected by legislation nearly 1 century ago. So just acknowledging their vision and saying I wish there was a bit more of it around at the moment as we watch huge swathes of our city getting bulldozed over when they could be protected and saved, to compare the lack of vision shown by the current government and compare that to the amazing vision shown nearly a century ago is pretty tragic. I want to acknowledge Jerry Brownlee, the local Member of Parliament, for his efforts in bringing this bill to the House, and also as the former chairman of the Riccarton Bush Trust. I want to acknowledge the trustees for their work. This is a pretty small bill in the scale of things in Parliament, but for the trustees who have worked on it, it's a lot of effort. They were very ably assisted by the legal services team of the Christchurch City Council, and I want to acknowledge them as well. The Local Government and Environment Select Committee only heard 2 submissions on this bill, but they did make the effort of coming to Christchurch. They considered the bill very carefully. They didn't just rush it through or dismiss it, and I want to acknowledge them for their work and the Department of Internal Affairs officials who assisted the committee. I was very surprised to hear the contribution earlier of the Honourable Dr Nick Smith, because one of his questions to the submitters at the bill was basically, why the heck should we protect Riccarton Bush? There's a lot of bush in Nelson that could do with a bit of legislation, and I can't for the life of me think why we should protect this bush as opposed to Nelson Bush. And he left his colleagues and those of us on the opposite side of the table sitting there with our mouths open, and the submitters thought he was joking, which I think was a relief to everyone actually, and they just moved on and got on with the bill. But I was pleased that he has since been pulled into line and supporting the bill, and realises that the reason we should do it and perhaps extend it to areas of Nelson is because of that original leadership that he referred to in his contribution. There were very few amendments needed for this. One of the amendments aligns the bill with the SARA order in Council in relation to the position that the Trust would find itself in if a draft plan didn't meet the approval of the City Council, and all that amendment does is really allows for a proper process to go through, so that the City Council would have to give the Trust their comments on why they didn't support the draft plan back to the Trust would then revise their plan in accordance with the City Council concerns. So I think that's a very sensible modification that was made. Mr Speaker, other people have alluded to the clear passion of Honourable Jerry Brownlee, the local Member of Parliament, in regard to this piece of bush, this kahikatea, that's within his own electorate. And I'd encourage him, as Dennis O'Rourke from New Zealand First did earlier in this debate, to have the same sort of passion for the heritage that we are currently losing in Christchurch. A lot of people have talked about the cathedral. Other people have mentioned in this debate Cranmer Courts, but it's not just the odd 1 or 2 buildings, Mr Speaker. 50% of the listed heritage buildings within the 4 avenues in Christchurch have been demolished, and many of them have been demolished needlessly. They could have been saved, they should have been saved, and in my view, the haste to go ahead with demolition, the inability of the government to show leadership and say, this is our heritage, this can be protected and saved for the benefits of future generation, and here's some financial support to allow that to happen, has meant that we've lost a huge part of our history, and I regret that. I think it's an embarrassment to the people of Canterbury, and it's something that we'll regret for a long time. Mr Speaker, the final point I want to make is in regard to the consolidation of the legislation. Other members have spoken of it. It is unusual for so much legislation, 3 separate pieces of legislation, to be on the statute books, on our list of live statutes, just for one small area of the country. And I think it's a legitimate debate that we should have. And Nick Smith raised concerns in his contribution that even though he agreed it was outside the scope of the legislation to amalgamate the legislation under this amendment bill, that actually you might not need historic pieces of legislation in order to restore the heritage. And Mr Speaker, if we do need that to maintain our historical links, I think we should keep all those pieces of legislation on the statutes register, but particularly given how much we've lost in Canterbury. We've lost it needlessly. We've lost it because of a lack of leadership and a lack of financial support. It particularly irks me when I see that $196 million was spent on Eden Park, making Eden Park a place where we could play rugby in the World Cup. But in Christchurch, heritage buildings have received only $10 million, and that has only been when that funding has been matched dollar for dollar by community contributions. So the lack of support for retention of our heritage is tragic, and I wish that the Minister who's responsible for our earthquake recovery, who happens to be the same member who's in charge of this bill, would show as much passion for the rest of the city as he does, deservedly so, to Riccarton Bush.
Maggie Barry.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I rise with great pleasure to talk to the Riccarton Bush Amendment Bill and its second